Hello and welcome back to the channel. Yes, I have a mustache and it has been a long time since I've talked to you guys, but we are finally going to start going over the build on the car. And up next, we're going to be talking about the Cortex coilovers, what you need to know if you want to put a 305 section tire on one of these cars. All right, guys, let's get into it. Okay, so it has been a long time since I've talked to you guys. Yes, I know there are plenty of reasons why, and I will get into that. But first and foremost, let's address the mustache. It's November right now, and so up here at least we call it Movember. And if you're participating in any charities for men's prostate cancer or just men's cancers in general and spreading awareness, a bunch of guys in my office decided to do it. We keep talking about it, everyone keeps saying, hey, let's do it, it'd be awesome to do it, and nobody ever does it. So this year, two of my friends who had full beards came into the office November 1st, clean shaven, and I knew it was gonna happen, so we were gonna do it this year. I look ridiculous, let's just address it and get it over with. Yes, I know. All right, let's talk about the car, guys. So it has been, well, 3-4 months since I made a video, and there's a lot of reasons for that, primarily being we ran into a lot of challenges. Every time we started to work on the car, we found a problem, parts that we needed weren't here. It just was never something I was gonna prepare to film, and every time I did it, it was always last minute stuff. So I took a step back and I thought to myself, okay, let's build the car, run it, and then I can really give you an honest feedback on what the parts are like and what you're gonna need to do if you're thinking about doing this. So I'm gonna start right now. We did the brakes and we talked about some other parts in step 1. Now on part 2, I'm gonna go over the Cortex JRI coilovers front and rear. I've made a lot of changes to these, so you're gonna wanna watch this if you're thinking about doing the setup on your car. I'm gonna save you a ton of money because I bought lots of parts that I ended up not needing. And now that I've kind of got the setup dialed in and the way it should be, we're gonna go over it now, and hopefully this is gonna help you guys out. All right, so let's start off with the fronts where I left off last time, and then we're gonna go into the rears. All right. So as you probably saw in the last video, I had the brakes on and I was showing the Cortex coilovers. So a couple things that have changed though since I did it is I've changed the spring that's now in the front, and I've added a helper spring. So these came from Cortex with an 8-inch length spring in the front and a lower spring rate. It was 450 pounds. I've increased it to 500 pounds and a 7-inch spring with the helper spring. When you add this helper spring here, even though it collapses after the car's under load, it still is almost about 3/4 of an inch. So you're gonna raise your car. So you can't quite get it as low as you would want with the 8-inch spring. So instead, I went and got the 7-inch spring, 500 pounds as well, still 2.5-inch diameter, which is what the factory ones are, the ones that come from Cortex. And now I can get the ride height correct. So that's one thing you're gonna need to change. Now, when I mentioned I ran into some problems, I mentioned that I did buy these coilovers used. When I got the rears, they were blown right out of the gate. So I sent them down to JRI and those guys helped me out and they got them rebuilt for me. The fronts we thought were fine. We did one track day event on them and I could tell the car was bouncing all over the place in the front end. Something wasn't right. So I ended up taking them out and sure enough, they were blown. I'll cut to a little video here showing you guys. I think I filmed it on my phone, so it'll be iPhone quality, but it'll give you an idea of what we discovered. Right, not cool. Here's one thing I will say about when you're thinking about coilovers. There's lots of different companies out there that make coilovers for our cars, you know, and when you're doing a build like this, you want a brand that's gonna support you. Cortex, number one, has been great to me. Those guys have been awesome. I've appreciated everything that Philip has done for me, and Steve Poe and his wife Stacy Poe. They've overnighted and rushed parts out to me. You know, one thing that's poking out now that you can see is the Cortex sway bar end links. And I did get an Eibach front sway bar. We can go over that in the next video, but I needed to get parts run out to me right away. I think you can't see it in here, but there's the Maximum Motorsports tie rod bump steer kit on there as well. I needed that. We discovered that was a desperate part. So those guys overnighted everything to me. But the one company that I can't say enough good things about is JRI. In both situations when I shipped those rears overnight to them, within 24 hours they had them back to me and back on the car. Same thing happened here. These blew. I had another race lined up in another week or two, or a track day event, I guess you would say, to be fair. And they overnighted them again. I had them at their office by 10 a.m. They were rebuilt and back on the FedEx truck by 4:30. That's a level of service these days that you just don't find anywhere, and I'm really proud to have their product on my car. I'm going to continue to always buy JRI shocks whenever I can, just because of what they did to support me. That was unbelievable. So now that I've said that, let's talk a little bit more. I just want to do the last little bit on the front, then we'll get to the rear. So on these particular coilovers, let's see if I can get in. You can have an option from Cortex to have what they call the 315 millimeter offset. What this does is this extends this piece that goes out to the knuckle here to give you more clearance for a wider tire. Now I know they say it's 315. I guess it depends on what wheels you're running, and that's to be totally fair. I'm running the Apex EC7s 52 millimeter offset, so I have to still run a spacer. So this is a hub centric spacer. OP Mustang makes these, really decent quality. Now this is a 15 millimeter spacer, so it's not too bad. I did have a 25 millimeter spacer on it first because I didn't think I was going to get these coilovers, and it's totally not necessary. Once you have them, you can reduce it down to a 15 millimeter spacer. But what you're also going to need is the Ford Racing hub kit. This comes with the 3-inch ARP wheel studs. That's how you safely run a spacer on a car. First, it should be hub centric. So as you can see on here, this is just right on the hub, and there's a little bit of a lip, and that's extending, so it's acting just like the factory hub when you go to mount a wheel on here. So the combination of running a hub centric spacer with a proper wheel stud is how you safely run spacers on a car. At the end of the day, this is no different than running a crazy weird offset wheel that essentially just has all this extra material here machined onto the wheel itself to allow the wheel to space out. So whether you do it with a spacer or the wheel, at the end of the day, it's not that much of a difference. As you guys can see, got the rest of the air ducts on, but in order to get a 305 section tire, so it's an 18 by 11 I'm running, 52 offset, EC7s from Apex, I've had to get that coilover on there with that spacer and these wheel studs. That's how you get this set up to fit on the front. The 2.5-inch diameter springs, no issue whatsoever. You're nowhere near making contact with any of this. These rub marks aren't from the wheel or anything. They're just on there from, I guess, just manhandling them. So that's the setup up front. Nothing rubs. I think I could run a smaller spacer, but if I ran a smaller spacer, I might start to introduce a bit of rub. With the 15 millimeter spacer on the car, they are nice and flush with the fender. They don't stick out past the top of the fender whatsoever. Yeah, they stick out a little bit here, but that's because this is carving in anyway, so there's not much you can do to prevent that. But as far as up at the top, perfect, nice and flush. It's a good, clean look. I'm happy with how those fit. Now the rear is where I ran into a ton of problems. There's a couple things that even Apex will tell you when you're trying to run a 305 section tire in the rear of these cars. They're gonna ask you to run a Watts link. As you guys saw in the last video, I already had a Watts link in there, but we have upgraded to the Cortex one. Again, I'm gonna do another video going over that in detail, but I really wanted to kind of focus on this part of the suspension. The reason you need a Watts link instead of a pan head bar is they're trying to reduce any play of the axle this way. Because if the axle's moving back and forth, it's gonna make contact all in here and all sorts of mess, and it's not gonna be good. So that's one reason why they suggest that. Again, I'm also running longer wheel studs, so we did the whole GT500 conversion, as I mentioned in the last video. Here's your GT500 with the same brand of brake rotors, same pads, same caliper as what you had on the Boss. The GT500 and all the rest of the Mustangs have the exact same caliper. Nothing changes there, just different pad. Now, these coilovers from Cortex come with a same 2.5-inch diameter as the fronts, which is fine for most people. But if you're gonna try and run a 305 section tire, there's gonna be a couple issues. It's not so much when the car's on the ground and traveling. At no point did my suspension ever make contact with the wheels. Never. Never a problem. What was happening was on the 2.5-inch diameter threaded collar here, when the car would be put up onto this lift like this, the wheel itself would start to come down and it would rub right across that and make contact. So I was getting these little marks on the wheel itself. They weren't going the whole diameter of the rim, so you knew that it was never happening under suspension travel. When the wheel's spinning, nothing's making contact. It's just simply when I put it up in the air. The other spot that it hits is right here. Now, this is just rubber hitting this part. The physical tire touches here, not the rim. So tire touches here, rim touches here. I've tried running spacers, still wasn't getting enough of a gap. And when I did start to get a spacer on here that would fit, it now started to stick out past the fenders and looked horrible, so I don't want that look. So I tried playing around with a couple silly things. First, I thought, okay, I'll change the length of the springs. Well, the problem is I'm already threaded pretty far down on here, and if I thread higher up, that lowers the rear farther than I want. So then I tried running a 2.5-inch 10-inch spring. It actually made it so that it could potentially make contact with the rim now under suspension travel. So I talked to Philip once again. Awesome. He gave me tons of feedback. I think we're on the phone for like an hour going over different options. And ultimately, him and I both kind of agreed the best way to solve this issue with that wheel tire combination that I'm running is to go 2.25 in the rear. This is really common with a couple other brands that make coilovers for our cars, especially when they're a married coilover instead of a divorced coilover. If you ever see those terms, all that means is shock still stays in the factory location, but the threaded collar and the spring goes to the factory location of where your old springs were. This is a true coilover, so this is a married coilover. This is the way, in my opinion, it should be done, because you just get way more adjustment, you get more play, and there's more options out there for you. So I ended up getting I tried some different spring rates as well. Now I'm doing a 250 pound, 2.25 8-inch spring with the helper spring still. If you don't have helper springs, I think most of the time when Cortex sells this setup, they sell it with a helper spring, and it's for good reason. The way that the spring actually sits in here is there's just this collar sitting on another collar with a snap ring. And if this spring is loose and bounces around, this is completely loose and it could pop off. Now, if it does that, that's because you're three-wheeling or you're getting air or something like that. So generally, you're not just normal driving here, but when you're on a track, and that's what I'm kind of doing with the car now, that could be potentially a problem. So I needed to change that out. So in order to get the 305s to fit correctly, this is the setup you're gonna have to run. You can play with the spring rates all you want. I'm doing 500 in the front, 250 in the rear. It's a setup that a lot of guys on the Boss 302Ss are liking. Some guys like to go 300 in the rear. I tried the 300 in the rear. It was okay. I just felt like the rear end wanted to slide out some more still, and I wasn't getting a lot of grip. So I've decided to try this 250 setup this coming up season and see how that feels. The next thing that you're going to want to consider when you're doing a 305 section tire, which is now squared, it's 305 in all four corners, you're going to need to change the sway bar. The sway bar that comes on our cars is like a 25 millimeter sway bar, way too big. It's meant for when you're running a staggered setup, so a bigger tire in the rear, smaller tire in the front. You need to reduce it. Now, a lot of guys run an 18 millimeter sway bar. I just couldn't find one in time, so I actually managed to find a 20 millimeter sway bar, and this comes from the 05 to 09 GTs. So I got that, got the polymer bushings, so it's all a little bit stiffer bushings on it. Major difference getting this sway bar on here. You get a lot more rear grip, you get less oversteer. The car just wants to bite and go into the corner, so great setup there. So I'm really happy with that. And that's really it, guys. Like I said, I want to kind of break the whole series down a little bit more for you. A lot has changed on the car. There's lots more parts. GT500 mufflers in the back. Nice and gold because of the amount of heat that is going into them. Got the Laguna Seca spoiler going on the back. Been really happy with the way that's turned out, the look. Cage is in the car, really dark, but you guys kind of get the idea. New shifters in the car, Laguna Seca gauge pod. There's just so much to go over, and I will go over it. And even right now, as I'm filming this, just to give you a little tease, I'm midway through doing a set of American Racing long tube headers. That's been, it's been a challenge, but you know, I'm enjoying doing it myself. At least I can say I've done it. So I'm super happy about that. All right, guys, that's everything for today's video. I wanted to make it nice and quick. Yes, it's been a while, but we are gonna get right into it. I hope you guys have lots of questions. I know there's been questions on the other ones, and I felt bad about not making videos in a bit, but I really wanted to do it right. I wanted to give you guys the right opinions, the right information, rather than just speculating. I really want to make sure that while I'm doing these videos, they're helping everyone out in the community, and you know, it's helping you guys out, and I'm making tons of mistakes for you. So learn from my mistakes. We'll see you guys in the next one. I'm just gonna keep filming, keep making a bunch here over the winter, because we got lots of winter projects, and we'll be picking it right back up in the new season. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.